This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 27 of Here's How. There's going to be lots of new candidates and new parties in the upcoming election. It's the first general election for Renua, and we're going to have one of their first-time candidates talking about their party policies in this podcast.
Here's How is Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast. Make your view heard. Just dial 076 603 5060 and tell the world what you're thinking. Your voicemail may be included in the next podcast. You can find tips on recording your contribution and other ways to contact the show at here'show.ie/call.
The Athenaeum House Hotel in Waterford is run by Mailo Power and her family. She's also the Renua candidate in Waterford. Mailo, what inspired you to get involved in politics?
I suppose it was really and truly the fact that I didn't feel as a family-run business that I was being represented. I also felt there was a total disconnect between decision-making in Dublin and the reality of life in Ireland in 2016 in business. And also in Waterford, we have felt underrepresented for the last two governments.
I know that you said that one of the things you were interested in was that Renua was proposing solutions. One of the main things that you're proposing, one of the main things is a flat tax, and what that is basically everybody in the country would pay the same tax rate. There would be one single tax rate. I see that you've proposed it to be 23%. And I was just looking at some figures on that. Somebody on earning 20,000 a year, which wouldn't be a lot above the minimum wage, would make a gain of about €450. That's about €8 a week. Somebody on 200,000 would gain €45,000 a year. Is that really justified?
I think that the thing we have to look at is to get away from the actual thing of how much a person is actually, gaining or not gaining. There's two things that are very important. One is what we're trying to do is, at the moment, we have 17 different tax brackets. And in actual fact, those on the very, very high income are actually not paying their full amount because there's all these tax shelters. What we're talking about is eliminating these tax shelters. There's the squeezed middle. There's over 1 million people that are being absolutely crucified at punitive levels. When they reach just over 30,000, they're paying 40% of their salary.
40% of that portion of their salary. That's
right. But what we're trying to do is actually give people more money in their pocket. What a lot of people are forgetting is the graduated basic income. The flat tax is not just in isolation. Flat tax is actually taken in tandem with the graduated basic income. So therefore, it's in a stage process from, say, those on the very, very low, as you mentioned, the 20,000, they would actually get the full portion for every man, woman and child in the family of 3,600 so per annum. So it could well be a case that at the moment, if you actually don't use your allowances, they're just written off.
So just so that I understand this, just so that I can understand it, somebody on a very low income would get little or no benefit from that 23% tax rate.
But they would get benefit from the graduated basic income. Like, for example, an unmarried mother, she would for the first time get not only an allowance for herself, but she would actually get a double allowance. So it's recognising the fact that she is on her own. Therefore she would get, a double payment.
And when you say a graduated basic income, how is it graduated?
It goes all the way, say, somebody at the very basic wage would get the full 3,600, and then it would graduated all the way up to 70,000. Those on the higher level of the graduated income would get a very minimal amount.
Okay, but
the other thing that flat tax does is it stops this disincentive to work. for example, I have staff here who ask me, please don't give me X number of hours because I will lose my benefits.
Okay, so they're getting some in-work benefits, and if they go over a certain number of hours, they're going to get that. They're going to lose those. But do you dispute that for people on the 200, 300,000 incomes, there will be a huge tax cut for them?
Well, if you look at it this way, there's two things. One, if you actually have a small company, maybe employing 3 or 4 people, they're paying 12.5% of tax. And if you have somebody with several hundred people working, they also pay 12.5% tax.
This is corporation tax.
That's right. So it's not that we actually want to actually disincentivize people on the lower income. What we want to do is reward all people. The other thing it will actually create more disposable income, and therefore the government will be able to collect more revenue through other value-added tax and other forms of tax.
Now I think that the argument about that the government gets more tax by cutting tax is one that's been had in other places. I'm not going to go into that. And I accept what you're saying about the basic income and about tax shelters, but on the face of it, that 23% flat tax rate would be a huge tax cut for people on 6-figure incomes.
It would, but you would also have the situation where it would make Ireland the best English-speaking place in Europe to actually do business. So it would actually attract business people to Ireland, and it would actually help with the actual brain drain that we have at present.
Okay. One other thing that I stood out to me in your policy documents that you have on your website, you said about mandatory training for government purchasers. It's certainly the case that it seems very often when the government buys something, they get much worse value than the average Joe on the street can. And we can name, scandals like PPARs or whatever, whereby huge amounts of money are spent on not very much. Mandatory training seems like a good idea. Can you maybe just expand on that a little bit?
Well, what we're trying to do is get the best value for the people of Ireland, because all the government money is actually tax collected as well as borrowing. So what we're trying to do is give the best value for money for Irish people. So at present, the whole area of public procurement is actually so complicated that it does two things. One, it actually cuts the small business out of actual tendering, because the tendering process is so difficult. And the other thing it does is that it actually because in some cases the companies are so large that can only tender, they actually have a monopoly on the market. So what we're trying to do is two things. We want to try and open the entire public procurement market to all businesses, which would be by the Scottish model is one that works really, really well, where a particular area, all small businesses combine to actually put in a tender. And in that way it would actually generate more business for smaller companies, but it would also open up the whole area of procurement. It's also very important that the training process, that public procurement, those that are actually acting on behalf of the government, that they actually are fully trained so that they actually get the best value for the government and for the people of Ireland.
Sure. It seems astonishing that we would be in a situation whereby people who are essentially spending the government's money are doing the job without being trained for it, but that's a whole other story. One of the things, though, that I saw on that was, and I'll just give you a little quote from your policy document, it says, "We would introduce social impact clauses requiring government buyers of goods and services to consider the economic, social and environmental impacts of their purchasing. These impacts would form a part of the overall objective scoring criteria for the award of public procurement contracts. Failure to include and properly take account of the social effects of a tender allocation process will be grounds for the suspension of the award process and or an appeal to the Ombudsman." Now, I think that's a long way of saying that when the government goes to buy something, you wouldn't have them just buying it for the cheapest option. They would be looking at the social effects of that. When you're buying something, you're buying something, especially when you're buying it with somebody else's money, it's very easy to say A costs less than B. You can also make a kind of a judgment. A might cost a bit more, but you get more for your money, and on the whole, it's a better value. But if you're saying the social value of buying product A instead of product B, that's a very soft decision. Isn't there space when there's a lack of transparency? Isn't there an awful lot of space for abuse there?
Well, no, I think what that actually is all about is actually trying to actually encourage open up the market for smaller companies. So, for example, if you actually have a company that's, say, a multinational that is based, say, in the UK, and they're tendering, and then you also have a group of businesses in Ireland that are tendering, if the actual benefit to that particular area would be a massive benefit.
But what benefit? How would you measure that benefit?
In jobs.
No, it's a social benefit. How do you measure that?
As in jobs, that if the benefit of a particular area was to actually create jobs, and also from the point of view of sustainability, for say, for example, you have food element, that if you actually have an area where you're actually maybe buying meat produce, or area, where you actually are supporting farmers.
But Mailo, can't you see the difficulty there, that if somebody tenders for a contract, they don't have the best price, they don't meet the requirements or whatever, they don't get it, and then they come along and they say, but we're nicer to the cows that we put in our meat, and we have nicer looking, we recycle all our packaging or whatever. So now we're going to sue the government and say that they should have paid over the odds us, rather than getting the best value product.
No, there would be clearly defined, areas. That's where the whole training comes in. There would be actually a points basis, so it would be very clearly defined. So it's not something that it would be arbitrary. It's something that would be clearly defined beforehand.
I would hope so. One other area to look at your the policies on your website. You're talking about ethics and so forth, and that's certainly been a problem. And there's certainly politicians behaving badly. We've seen on prime time recently of local councillors straight out demanding bribes to somebody they'd only met a few minutes before. But you say here, in particular, an automatic by-election will occur where a TD or senator, and so I guess that basically means the TD would lose their job, be put out of the dole, if the TD has been cited in the Revenue's tax defaulter list for a sum of not less than 50,000, has had adverse findings against them made by a tribunal, has been found guilty of fraud in the courts, or has been found to have acted willfully and consistently in an improper fashion by SIPO. So, first of all, I can see where if somebody has been found guilty before the courts of a crime, you can see how you might be able to get an arrangement whereby on that basis they would lose their seat. But being cited on the Revenue's tax defaulter list, that's a very soft judgment. And the Revenue frequently enters into negotiations with people as to whether or not they will be cited on the list, and maybe if they pay up within a certain amount of time. And there's a lot of space for negotiation there. But in particular, if they've been found to act improperly by SIPO can cite them, and then they've lost their seat. Surely it's unconstitutional.
Well, it is omitting details, or not actually playing on a level playing pitch, is that, we have to put ourselves, if you're actually representing the people of Ireland, then you have to have very high standards, both moral standards and also ethical standards. But do you not accept there's a huge
possibility for abuse there? SIPO is that's the Standard and Public Office Act body. There's a huge space for abuse within that somebody who's essentially operating as a civil servant has the power to fire a TD so that voters who voted for them lose their voice in the Dáil.
Well, it's all to do basically with openness and transparency. So if it's a case that you actually, that you're not actually open with your dealings with SIPO, then if you're not open with, with your dealings, then it's very, very difficult to actually, at the moment there's absolutely no guidelines or no mechanism in which, if a TD is found doing wrongdoings, then basically they get a slap on the knuckles, but there's actually no consequences.
Well, there is consequences. The voters decide.
Well, yes, the voters may decide, and that is, they have ultimately they decide who they put into the door. But if they're not aware of the whole picture of the ethical, of the ethics involved, if it's actually kept from them, then that is very unfair to the voters.
But hold on a second. What you're saying essentially, if the voters, poor innocents that they are, don't make the right decision, we'll have some civil servant to come along and to correct what they do.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if the voters are not aware of the full facts.
Okay, but you will be aware that in our constitution it is difficult even to arrest a TD, let alone take any other action against them, and that's there for a very important reason, because if you had a less than democratically inclined government, the temptation is to use their influence in the revenue, to have them put on the tax defaulters list, or in SIPO to have an allegation against them perhaps sexed up a bit, and then you have a troublesome TD out of the door. It's notable that in the entire penalty points scandal, there's only one TD, in fact only one person in the entire country, who ended up in handcuffs after that, and that was Claire Daly, the person who exposed it.
I see where you're coming from, and I understand, the area that I understand the dangers. There isn't a perfect system. I suppose what we're trying to do is to try and make it, if at all possible, the best possible transparent form of government.
But isn't it a bit naive to say that if you're essentially taking power away from the voter and giving it to some faceless bureaucrat, you're being a bit hoping that the faceless bureaucrat will exercise it not in their own self-interest or in the interest of the bureaucracy, but in the interest of democracy?
Well, I would regard it on the other, the other side of the coin, that at the moment there is no accountability. It's very, very difficult. I mean, we've heard scandal after scandal after scandal, and nothing is being done.
But in many cases, the voters, whether you agree with that decision or not, and I think both of us wouldn't, but in many cases, the voters have voted TDs in who have been exposed as being at the centre of a number of scandals. And in fact, the bureaucracy has not proved itself to be stronger against corruption than the voters. We see nearly a decade after the report of the Flood Mahon Tribunal, after the first report, the Attorney General still hasn't advised the Gardaí on whether or not to begin a criminal investigation into those findings.
Well, on the doorstep, I've been finding people, that are actually very, very frustrated about the scandal after scandal and no action.
That's true, although you're canvassing, I guess, in Waterford and not in Tipperary.
Absolutely, and that's so. And we cannot have a situation. We live in Ireland. We cannot have a situation where one county has different laws to the other.
That's true. Mailo, one last question. If you were to say one thing, one sentence to the voters of Waterford, why they should vote number one for you and Renua, what would that be?
I think because I would say I have experienced firsthand the frustration that they are sharing, the difficulties in business, the lack of voice, and somebody has to stand up for Waterford. I think one of the biggest slap in the face we got in Waterford, and it's coming up time and time again, is that we actually lost our city status in 2014 under the stewardship of this government in the very year that we were celebrating our 1,100th birthday. And I think that is just, it's a shocking indictment.
Mailo, that's more than one sentence, but thank you very much for that.
No problem.
Mailo Power is the Renua candidate in the election for Waterford. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Not at all. You're more than welcome.
If you like the Here's How podcast, please rate and review the show on iTunes and other podcast providers. Share it on Facebook and Twitter. Tell your friends. But most of all, make your views heard. Call us on 076 603 5060.
That's almost the end of episode 27 of Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, published on the 2nd of February 2016. I'm going to be continuing the interviews with party spokespeople in the run-up to the election, but I might cover other topics too, though not with candidates in the election. If you can think of a topic or want to suggest someone to include, that could be yourself, then let me know. If you like the podcast, please go on iTunes and give it a rating or even write a nice review. Also, please like the show on Facebook, please follow @Here's How Podcast on Twitter, and of course subscribe to the show. You can use iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, or any other podcast app or software. You can do all of that or get in touch with the show right from www.here'show.ie. If you're going out canvassing, be sure to tell everyone how great the podcast is. The next show will be uploaded shortly. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. Thank you for listening.